I'll just go through from left to right. We have Stephen and Jenny at the top of the table, Anne Marie and Kelsey in the middle, and it's just the two groups. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, Kelsey, Anne Marie, and Stephen and Jenny. Thank you so much for being here. So I think we'll just get started. Just a few little things to use the mic. To introduce yourself by name as you're asking questions, which will come at the end, and let me know if there's anything else that I can do or we can do to make this space accessible to you. So thank you.
Thanks, Eliza. Hey, I'm Kelsey. So, my opening image is a picture of two of the dancer researchers involved in this project. Alexis, a white woman, is seated on the floor holding a microphone. Iris, an older white woman using a power chair, is just to the right and behind her, her arms raised. In this paper, I'm going to share a little of my dissertation research. Specifically, I want to think about how improvisation, memory, and what we include in the aesthetics of accessibility. This research project began by considering access to elements of timing in dance. How do integrated dancers make things like unison movement, moving in extremes of fast and slow, integrating our own timing with another person's and partnering? How do we make all of that accessible? I figured out along the way that we were also interested in access intimacy, which I won't talk about here, but you can ask me about later, and the aesthetics of accessibility. So before I talk about the aesthetics of accessibility, shout out to all the people who are doing access work at this conference. It's very hard work, so thank you. So, the aesthetics of accessibility. In a report to the Canada Council, Jacobson and McMurtry defined the aesthetics of accessibility as art practices that declare access to be an integral part of creative content and the artistic process from inception to presentation. This phrase reflects an understanding of aesthetics as a series of underlying principles guiding artists or artistic movement, placing access as a central principle to the disability arts movement in Canada. CRIPSI, the company the dancer researchers and I work with, often articulates itself as concerned with the aesthetics of accessibility. This research brought together 8 dancer researchers, including myself, from CRIPSI, Edmonton's integrated disability and CRIP dance company. These dancer researchers had a wide range of impairment experiences and an equally wide range of experiences in both integrated and normative dance. We used a participatory arts-based research approach where we collaboratively built a dance piece, and our rehearsals were the primary site of data collection. So here's a photo of Sarah lying face down on the floor, her hands folded together in front of her dark hair, and her legs long and relaxed. I'm going to focus here on some of our learnings about improvisation scores. From the start of this research, the dancer researchers were very deeply invested in improvisation. This interest in improvisation may have come at least in part from our focus on accessibility. Improvisation, especially contact improvisation, is often suggested to be an accessible alternative to normative Western concert dance technique. However, it became quickly obvious to me in rehearsal that working with improvisation scores, so a series of prompts or constrictions that dancers respond to, assumes dancers can remember and execute a series of prompts. Researching through art meant that we needed to be collaboratively building the dance. And practically, this meant that we often moved from less structured improvisation to more structured improvisation. For example, when creating the final improvisation score, we began by thinking about how time slows down in the event horizon of a black hole. The physics of black holes gave us a visual and movement metaphor to describe the felt relativity of time. We started with improvisation. Could we move closer to imaginary black hole and faster the further we got from it? Each time we tried the improvisation, we all reflected on what we felt, prompting changes to the improvisation. And these changes consistently imposed more structure on the improvisation score. This process proved quite inaccessible to one of my dancer researchers, Robert. Because of the demands on his working memory, he couldn't fully participate. So, working memory is memory that uses newly perceived information for learning and decision-making. Robert explained to me, like, once I catch on and see things, you know I can do things. But if somebody lays 8 or 9 rules on me, do this, don't do that, stop over there at 2 o'clock, over there at 2:10, I'll get confused. Collectively determining 8 or 9 rules to form the improvisation score and then repeatedly changing them was exactly what we did for that rehearsal, and Robert was confused for the entirety of it. This point created a point of ethical tension for me. Many of the other dancer researchers talk constantly about how important collaboratively building the dance was for them. So we built a beautiful dance in a way that was deeply meaningful for many of the people involved in the process. And at the same time, that process was incredibly inaccessible to one of the members of the group. I didn't know how to resolve this tension at the time. So I pushed through with the rehearsals, hoping that as the score solidified, Robert would catch up. So thus far, I've assumed that Robert not being able to remember the score is a problem. I'm being a good integrated dance choreographer in that I'm assuming the problem is with my process, not with the bodies and minds of the dancer researchers I'm working with. But I'm still assuming there's a problem. I want to step back for a moment and examine that assumption. To do that, I'm going to turn to some video footage of our rehearsals. And you're going to get 2 chances with this. So let's see if I know how to press play. When I examined the footage of that rehearsal where we were building the score, I noted a number of times where Robert makes choices outside the score. So here, the dancer researchers are moving in circles around the edge of the rehearsal hall, imagining a black hole in the center of the room. We're watching the action over the shoulder of Alexis, who's in the foreground in a tiger onesie, focalizing into a looper pedal. Iris comes to stop in the middle of the room, metaphorically caught in the gravity of the black hole. She uses this movement, a small circling of the forearms with fingers extended, to signal to the rest of the group she's caught. Robert notices and joins her. So, despite the fact that freeing people from black holes is not something that's physically possible, we just decided that we wanted dancer researchers to be able to rescue each other. There were 2 rescue movements that we were working with at this point. So first, when the dancer researchers were caught and making the movement with the forearms, another dancer researcher would bring their arms and fingers as close as possible to the caught dancer researcher's hands and fingers. Their hands and fingers would circle bigger and bigger until both the dancer researchers broke away. The other option was that the second dancer researcher would come up and place their hand on the side of the caught dancer researcher's head, guiding them into a spin that would have let them escape the black hole. So in this photo, Sheena, white woman with short hair, is freeing Sarah. Sheena's hand has her hand on the side of Sarah's head, guiding her into a turn. Robert uses neither of these options to free Iris. In this video, he's an older man in a green shirt, and he comes beside Iris in the center of the room and circles his fingers and hands, but does not bring them close to her. Instead, he decides to leave the black hole of his own accord, violating the laws of physics in both this universe and the universe of the improvisation. He almost immediately circles back and places his hand on Iris's back instead of her head. They remain there for a little while until Sarah, in the purple top, drifts into their proximity and frees Iris by placing her hands and fingers close to Iris's. You can see me sitting at the left side of the camera frame watching. At the moment you're watching, I think this moment and others like it are a big problem for me to solve. But let's reframe this. Benjamin suggested that improvisation teaches us on a daily basis to readjust our perceptions of occurrences that we might ordinarily regard as mistakes or distractions. If I strip away my preconceptions of what the right thing to do in this improvisation score is, I can see each of these moments as a deliberate choice by Robert to place himself in positions and in movement that emphasizes connection to another dancer researcher. So can I see these problems as moments that actually are about connection and embody an aesthetics of accessibility? This brings us to a question of what an aesthetics of accessibility encompasses. I think we all find it easy to understand the curve and sway of a wheelchair in motion as beautiful. In theater, we are drawn to bold directorial choices that incorporate ASL interpretation as part of a meaningful part of staging. Stage lighting that is designed to work with house lights up in a relaxed performance is a thing of beauty. And yet, as I list off all these things that I and many other people are deeply invested in, these are all deliberate choices. For me to consider the moments where dancer researchers' working memory capacities run up against the demands of our dance practices and failed, and to see those as beautiful requires me to see confusion and failure as beautiful. So to try and start to do that, I looked to Haberstam, who suggests that any cryptoepistemology worth its name should identify modes of not knowing, unknowing, and failing to know. If cryptoepistemologies, unique ways of knowing informed by impairment, illness, and disability, can incorporate unknowing, then can the aesthetics of accessibility and my choreographic eye eventually learn to incorporate moments of not knowing, failing to know, and failing to remember as an important part of our aesthetic? Cuppers wrote, accessibility does not only refer to impairment-specific alterations to the normal performance encounter, but to providing conceptual space for stepping back to see our cultural framings. Maybe becoming a better integrated dance choreographer is not just learning to create structures and systems that support my dancer researchers memorizing improvisation scores. Maybe it's about continually learning to reevaluate what I find beautiful and valuable while striving for the full involvement of everyone in every part of the creative research process. So, thank you to all the dancer researchers who gave their time, bodies, and critical thought to this work. There are Robert, Brooke, Sarah, Iris, Chris, Sheena, and Alexis. Thank you to Tracy Kolenchuk for the photography in this presentation. To our organizers of the conference for having me here. And finally to SHRP for supporting this research. Thank you.
very pleased to be here today, be a part of this wonderful event. So I'm very happy actually to go after you, as it's a lot of interconnection with my own speech. I'm very happy. It was extremely interesting to hear you. So I'm gonna go here. They're working perfectly. So as I said, I'm very happy to be here with you today. Thank you very much for having me here. I will personally more talk about how art can challenge ableism with dance and invisible disability. We heard about physical disability, and that's something in the dance world that is, in our research at least, research is common. But I decided to go further to see what can be done and what is in the dance, professional dance field with invisible disability, more specifically mental health issues, and more specifically anxiety, depression, and eating disorders. And I'm very happy, but also it's a challenge to be in front of you today, as I live with a general anxiety disorder myself for the past 10, 15 years. So, and that's a big part of my research. I put myself in my research as well. So, a little heads up to begin with. So, this study explores the potential of dance to create positive changes around invisible disabilities such as mental health issues, as I just said, because there's no professional dance companies working specifically on that subject. I will extrapolate and extend upon the exciting work already being done on physical disability with Access Dance Company based in Oakland, California. So to do so, I will highlight quickly some aspects to explain why dance is a great medium before to present the culture model I created for any artistic company that would like to advocate for invisible disability. So just a quick table of contents. So the relation between, I will begin with what is invisible disability, what can be, what should be, what could be invisible disability, to go after the relation between dance and disability. And as a final contextualization, I will go through dance as an effective way to deconstruct how disability is perceived, and to go to the main part, which is my time at Access Dance Company. So the first part, the relation between dance, that's the other part, here we go. I forget to switch. So what is invisible disability? Very few scholars or dance company focused on invisible disabilities within performance. Dance scholar Anne Cooper-Bright has taken up the issues, writing that disability should include not only the most easily identifiable disabilities, such as some mobility impairments, but also less visible disabilities, including ones such as eating disorder and history of severe abuse, by example. It seems to me that all of these disabilities profoundly affect one's physical position in the world. So I like this quote because she states that many disabilities that don't come from your body will affect the position of your body in the world and your own position towards your body. Based on this, disabling conditions can include mental health problems, learning difficulties, chronic illness, and other physical conditions. Here, we're talking more precisely about mental health issues, anxiety, depression, eating disorders. There are many mental illnesses that are not always obvious to the onlooker, but can make performing everyday tasks extremely difficult. It can range from mild challenges to severe limitation and vary from person to person. So the relation between dance and disability, many scholars such as Garland Thompson and Haskell-Lee said, Petra Coopers, have studied the representation of the body intertwined with physical disability, in particular within the performing arts. They agree on the power of dance to transmit knowledge and establish awareness of disability. Their research argues that dance performance, which is inclusive of different dancers with different corporalities, has the potential to generate positive change for audiences, dancers, and potentially the wider society. So I want to go through very quickly why dance is an effective way to deconstruct how disability is perceived. as our self-researcher, maybe it can be something we know or we think about often, but I think it's very interesting to go through some bases before to go to my time and access. So I want to go see dance as an effective way to deconstruct how disability is perceived in 4 points. So I want to go through any disabled person is already a social performer because of people's gaze. Point 2, when disabled artists use their bodies to talk about their realities, it brings empowerment to not only the artists, but entire communities. 3, disabled artists can also take control back and bring empowerment to their communities through their use of space. And 4, finally, dance and its social impacts. So the first point, dance, disabled people as social performer, although stigmatizing attitudes are not limited to mental illness and far away from that. World Psychiatry says, unlike physical disabilities, people with mental illness have issues are perceived by the public to be in control of their disabilities and responsible for causing them. They are challenged by the prejudice that results from social misconception about mental illness, and using dance is confronting this already performer aspect by highlighting this social performer aspect, this social gaze. And dance exposes a stigmatizing look from society based on this misconception. The second point, taking back control of their body and the empowerment coming from that. The fact that the presentation of disability can be made by people identifying with these mental health issues is a progressive action to confront the traditional inaccurate representation based on these stigmas, preconception, and misconceptions. Positive consequence of that action is the empowerment felt by the artists to share how they want to present their reality and their mental health issues as well. The third point is gaining back control with space. And you see here an image of dancers of access dance companies that do very often representations outside of more theatrical space. So getting control back of spaces in society, the lack of physical and mental privacy has undermined many disabled people's ability to be confident in their use of space. In the specific context of dance representation, sharing space between performers and audiences can be conceptualized in terms of responses to movement, most prominently in terms of kinesthetic empathy. Kinesthetic empathy describes the ability to experience empathy merely by observing the movement of another human being in context of creative and cultural practices, here, such as dance. And the last point I want to go through before to go to Axis Dance Company is the impact, the social impact that dance can have. Dance companies must be conscious of their implicitly political and social nature, as they must consider their impact on society. Letting go of existing cultural constructs cannot easily happen on a conscious level. And this is why alternative modes of connection needs to be leveraged, which opens up the possibility of considering dance as one of these alternative modes. And this very quick introduction, I think, was a good. I think I needed this contextualization, as I cannot go too much in detail in depth in my work in Axis. But I actually was doing my research for my thesis with Axis. I was there working with them almost every day for 2 months, and I learned a lot. And we did focus group, we had interviews, discussions, and I participated with them in some rehearsals and some workshops and training that is done, and they usually do with their communities in Oakland. So I decided to work with Axis, actually, to develop an awareness around mental health issues. I decided actually to work with them as a functioning, well-known company working with disabled and non-disabled dancers, so IntegratedDance company, based on their work with theories and interviews, as I said, and my own participation as someone identifying with an anxiety disorder, I present a 3-layer model of a culture model, ou culture d'entreprise, that we can say as well, that could be applicable for developing an awareness around mental health issues in artistic companies. So the model is a 3-layer model of a company culture, and as you can see, I have 3 distinct separation, 3 layers, and each of these layers has 3 bullet points that we're going to go through. So you have representation, advocacy, and creating safe space, which in representation you have the body representation, collaboration, and performance, advocacy, education programs, vocabulary, and events, and creating safe space, such as office space, rehearsal space, and event space. My things are flying. It's okay, the most important part is here. So the first part, company culture, representation, and the first part of representation is the body representation. So, as any and all artistic creation is based on a certain representation of its subject, representation as a whole is intricately linked to artistic companies. In the representation and performance work, Axis leads by example by showcasing a variety of bodies. The company works to confront stereotypes about bodies, but not only for audiences, but with their own dancers as well. Working for this dance company brings dancers to think of themselves as artists, but as well as social agents. You have here one of the quotes from one of the dancers that is in a wheelchair after having a car accident. And she says, "It's been challenging to not be able to dance like I used to, but it has also been therapeutic in a way to reclaim that small part of what my experience was before the accident. It also introduced me to this whole wide world involving disabled people. I think what needs to be done is there is to be a lot more awareness. Knowing I knew nothing about this before my injuries, and now it becomes such a focal part of my life." This quote shows that once emerged in the company, the benefits are numerous. For dancers, being able to represent something new, dance with disabled and non-disabled bodies, teaches them about what is possible to do with disabled bodies. The same can be done with dance having mental health issues. The simple fact of being able to perform as a professional dancer and present a work of art, with a specific consideration for mental health issues allows dancers with these issues to fully understand what is possible to accomplish. The dancers cited above highlighted the lack of knowledge regarding the disabled artistic community and how it is possible to live fully with a disability, visible or not. It is crucial to make these communities more visible and make people aware of them so they can be a part of them and learn about them. Another very important point in the representation layer at Axis is the work of collaboration, and have the dancers and the administrative employees also highlighted to me the work of collaboration between the disabled body and non-disabled body is at the core of their work. Both people are important, and with Axis and its company, any type of body can learn from each other in the discovery of new movements and new experience. It helps to drop the preconception about who can do what and how, and who can use what kind of space, and by which means. You have a quote here from one of the Axis administrator. "I think in our work it's not only disabled body because we cannot do what we do without non-disabled dancers. And we're not a disabled dance company. We're not a wheelchair dance company. Both people are important." And the third point of the first layer of the 3-layer model is the performance aspects. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to go through the visual analysis based on a specific work of Axis, but I still want to go through on this aspect. As I don't have the time, I want to go focus actually on the kinesthetic experience that you can apply on different kind of artistic work. So the kinesthetic experience that I talked a little bit before is essential, for the audience to develop empathy and to have a better understanding of social injustice, in which people with mental health issues have to live on a daily basis. Viewing dance is a sensory experience through movement encounter. The knowledge that comes out from such an experience is thus non-discursive. This kinesthetic response is at the heart of how we must think about the use of dance in social science research. I just want to go here to just show you a little clip, just to give you an idea of what kind of work access. Gonna go through. No, it doesn't go through. I'm gonna escape this. Not very technological, sorry. I'm gonna go through on the screen. Yes, it is. Here we go. There you go, just very quick, just to give you an idea of the work. Yep, we went back to the beginning. So, quick reminder of what I said. And there you go. So the second layer of this company culture is the advocacy part, which is at the core, as well with the performing, if you want to advocate for a specific mental health issues or a specific disability. Or so outside the representation for access advocates through educational programs such as assembly in school, teacher training, and events such as Q&As, conferences, fair representation, and by using a very specific vocabulary. So the first educational program has a fundamental goal. These activities looks to introduce youth to a variety of realities and give them desire to explore all possibilities in their lives. Assemblies in school are significant for the team as the message of inclusivity teaches a broader message of empowerment. The creation of safe space for everybody is one of the main discussion points in teachers' training that they give. The organization of these events can inspire any dance company that would like to advocate for mental health issues and focus also with the relation with the communities, but the audiences as well. And during this discussion with dancers and administration team, I feel the passion and sense of duty as advocates for physical disability based on the notion that we all have a body. However, some dancers were uncomfortable talking about mental health issues, even if we all have a mental health. However, others brought many interesting ideas about the connection of the mind and the body and the general idea of health, which combines health in the mind and health in the body. Even in an open-minded community like the art and disability communities, misconceptions of lack of knowledge still exist regarding mental health. It shows that normative assumptions about mental health issues are still deeply noted in society. The third part of the layer about advocacy is vocabulary, which is a big part of structuring the oppressing discourse around disability. The way people use words often hides a very complex hierarchy, and the use of language can use someone's perspective. Many terms, often connected to medical terms, have been dehumanizing. Being mindful of terms use is imperative, which is why we must attempt to avoid the use of demeaning and oppressive language. The third layer and last layer is the creation of safe space. And it is vital in order to conceive a space where diverse people can share experiences. This third and last part of the three LMs, so the three-layer model, is also in action in the two other layers, which is advocacy and representation. These experiences are necessary to have in any interaction with the company, raising awareness. It's good to raise awareness for mental health issues. And this layer was drawn upon the notion of gaining back control spaces, which I talked a little bit earlier. So the idea of building safe space is one of them is based on not only the office space, but also the rehearsal space and the events. So the administration teams talk about the time of hours they go through and the type of just being that question or when they have to leave the office or very no pressure kind of environment. And the same thing through rehearsal space when they have to go through hours of dancing. They are very, they listen to their dancers a lot. And one of the administration team members shares, I'm from a performance background and moving into working with Access. I felt their rehearsal spaces were the healthiest spaces that I have seen. It really stuck out to me in terms of the hour we put our dancers through. We try really hard to give them something that feels sustainable. Those are things that strongly impact your health and performance spaces that I've moved through never considers those things. And also you have the event space, which is very important. I'm gonna take here 2 seconds, so which is very important as well, because when they create events and workshops open and free for the communities, they have to create a safe space that the people that are not dancers feel comfortable moving. And as like I said at the beginning, as somebody with an anxiety disorder, it was very challenging to me to go through these events. But it was very interesting and very. I learned a lot going through this, and just with contact improvisation, and just the layer that they put the people through a very comfortable way and very balanced way, and with safe words. And if you don't want to be touched, if you want to dance by yourself, you can use some safe words, or if you just want to leave during the event, they make you feel very comfortable to respect your own limits, which is actually extremely important. And that makes people with no disability or no mental health issues in my specific research to respect these limits and to learn these limits. Yes, thank you. So actually, it's the end of my presentation, but that could be very interesting to go through this layer, to go if in the sports it can be done, it can be used, or through independent artists and their practices, or in art schools and galleries, or different things, or different kind of establishment. If this three-layer model can be a good introduction to develop an awareness for mental health issues or even other disabilities. So that's it.
Do full screen, but
Hi, I'm Jenny, and this is Steve. And just I want to say thank you for the opportunity to come and share about our work. And I'm really glad we're part of this panel. It's been really interesting to hear what everybody else is doing. Is this working? Yes. Okay.
So, yeah, well, I think follows on a lot of the same questions and challenges. I suppose we frame a lot of our stuff in terms of multi-arts and in terms of some of the theories around complexity and development, because we came out of our work in the development area, which we can speak to. So our organisation, we're going to speak about sort of where we are at the moment with our organisation, aiding dramatic change and development. Broadly, we co-create inspiration experiences that help people influence and transform the world around them. So there's a certain developmental aspect. And we realised the word inspirational was a bit of a challenging word, but it's about the experiences being inspirational in a general sense rather than it being, actually one of the big things is working away from it being inspirational because we see something that's spectacular. So rather than inspiration in the sense that the people who attend are somehow challenged in their own thinking and their own perceptions. I'm just going to, so actually, just briefly, so our approach for creating change, we're sort of looking at it around 3 areas now. The idea of creating community networks, inspiring modes of expression, which some of the multi-arts is, and addressing local development issues, which is the work we were doing for 7-8 years in South Africa around HIV, and a lot of that work has informed our work more recently with the work with disability, which we're going to speak to. But in a way, all these 3 areas kind of link to each other, but we're mostly looking at the central area around inspiring new modes of expression. And we're going to be, so what we'd like to do for this to be its best, what we'd like to have happen is introduce the Imagining Possibilities movement that we've been developing and sort of evolved over the last 7 years. We'll share a bit around what has emerged from that as an integrated performance model, and then some of the ethical frameworks and considerations for engaging community members with complex disabilities and those who use alternative augmentative communication. And generally, just explain a bit what that framework involves.
Yeah. So. I'm not sure how many people are familiar, but alternative augmentative communication is ways of doing just that for communication for people who maybe can't speak verbally, but they can use either computers or word boards or symbols, and so it's often, it involves both people to translate your understanding what the person is saying, etc. So the Imagining Possibilities movement, like Steve said, is something that we've been developing over the last 7 years, and it is working with a group of adults who have cerebral palsy and use alternative augmentative communication, and we've been exploring ways for them to improvise, create stories, and working together. So this series of pictures, originally our work began in Toronto with the group, and we've now expanded it. The group that we originally began working with, they're now formed a leadership team. So they actually mentor and they go with us when we work with new groups of adults or community members with complex disabilities. And so they're part of facilitating those workshops with us. And so here is a picture actually of Hamilton. So we've got now Imagining Possibilities project growing in Hamilton as well. So we've got a group of 10 people there that are now also training to be mentors. And we're starting to work with youth. They're sort of learning to run workshops with youth.
So over the period of time, we've been working for the last over 7 years with our community in Toronto. So we meet weekly, and we were looking at ways to create modes of expression which actually could transcend complex disability And as we've been doing the project, we found so some of the community members that we engage literally actually can pretty much only read out loud. So the challenge of being able to give a chance for them to express what they're experiencing is challenging for them. So, but we make the challenge our challenge, not their challenge. So it's not about them being able to communicate accurately, which is what a lot of speech language pathology focuses on, but more a case of how we can stay within that not knowing, based on and work wherever different members of the group are able to work. So, and that's been where working time slows down, and how we work with time is a big part of that. So, and it can be that when we work with some of our visioning work with some community members, there can be when we want to bring someone new into that process, there can be a 15-minute process of them making their first choice. But that first choice might be the start of the whole story. So part of the challenge at the moment as well is we're trying to build some, working a lot around some, looking at some of the new theories in neuroscience and psychology around how embodied cognition could be supporting this work and what may be making it work the way that it does work. So that's, I'm not going to talk about that now, but that's kind of a part of this is, well, what are the mechanisms, some of the mechanisms around the meaning making which are being evoked in this process. And I think a lot of it does tie in with dance. So we speak back to what's on the screen.
Yeah, so I've just got a picture here of our a share we did for our Engaging Possibilities project. And so the Engaging Possibilities project was our sort of outreach and going out to different communities and doing workshops with community members. So this was at Brock University in St. Catharines in 2016. So this was the first time that we had done something like this, and this was actually a community sharing after a series of workshops where we had, where the group that came together improvised a story, and the audience or family and friends came to watch them improvise a story. And so this is the beginning. You can kind of see a fire. So we use fabric, which some of the pictures you'll see. The improvisation process that we've kind of developed, we use fabric, and so the group starts to envision a world, and we start to create that world with the fabric, and then eventually, once the world is created, the story seems to emerge, and then things happen within that story, within that world, and sometimes, depending on the group and depending on how much they've worked in the process. Sometimes it's just about everybody being, could be just being at that campfire and enjoying being in that campfire and being in that moment. And then other times, some of the stories actually do have like a full narrative where, certain things happen and we kind of watch and see what goes on. So, so this is 30 minutes after that other picture where we've sort of created, the group has created this world, and, we've got the waterfall, the sunset is that orange fabric up in the air, sort of the sunset reflecting off of the water. And then we've got our campfire. We've got people from the other side that crossed over. We had a dog that was drowning, but has been saved. So it's quite involved. So that, and the quote up there, "We are showing what is possible." That's from one of our Imagining Possibilities leadership team members, and that is what the group is called, sort of the original group that we were working with. And so yes, and that is her response to the work that we're doing, because she has cerebral palsy, and something that she actually often talks about is how we can do what other people are doing too. It's just different. And so, and that is, kind of something that carries through with the work that we're doing. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the leadership team. So it's a collective of devised theater artists who work across physical and communication boundaries to shift the way people who use alternative cognitive communication with cerebral palsy are perceived by engaging in artistic collaboration with their peers and expressing their unique ideas, stories, and identity through performance. And they're also taking leadership roles in creating artistic experiences for their peers and communities.
So in this sense, this is the, yeah, we're going to get to this bit now, is the we're framing this as a group collaboration, and it's not to say that, so there's also a lot of work, there's occasionally work where members of the AUC community might be particularly, someone who's particularly able to communicate through their board or some other way, can be kind of, their life story can be shared. Maybe a lot of times the challenges around having some of the challenges of disability are presented. So this takes a slightly different approach, coming more from the community arts, collective creation perspective. So then the challenge is, how do you bridge that, and how do you create the framing? And especially recognising that, like in the 1970s, it was actually stated medically that if you couldn't talk, you couldn't think. That was how it was even. So, you know, so not long ago, this group basically just assumes that they don't know, there's an assumption that they haven't got a contribution to make. Unfortunately, this has been something that we're really trying to reframe, really, what is possible. So this is the framing for the Come to the Edge show. And the idea is that the group travel around in, it's a metaphorical helicopter, obviously, and they would land and they would take people to the edge of what they think is possible. And so this is actually the leadership team in Toronto, photoshopped into this, and this is the way that we approach trying to move from sharing in a workshop, which is what we showed earlier, to one where the actual audience gets integrated inside an immersive piece. So we're going to show a bit on that, which we actually took recently to Belgium. Two of the members came to Belgium with us and presented at a conference. And we did a mini Come to the Edge there and at a residence in Belgium, which is really exciting. And we've just been looking at how we can take this work to Vancouver as well. So there's some possibilities there that we're just trying to explore. So basically, just very quickly so in terms of the sessions, we look at actively shaping and influencing the story that unfolds. This is one of those, how can everyone in that space, and whichever the session is, when we're actually doing our workshops particularly, actively shape and influence the story that unfolds. How can we find ways to give time to explore and express ideas, and pay attention and listen to different forms of expression, words, sounds, gestures, breath, objects, symbols, texture. So we've been exploring that, and actually been part of Disabilities Working Group, sort of getting ideas of other members of that to do that. So when we do our work, we one of the things we're really looking at is opening up the group to their senses and making it where it's not all about what they're communicating, it's heightening the ability to receive and make choices and to be really, really open to what's going on in the moment. So we'll go. These are some of the sessions in the workshops, which we'll go past. This is going back to the work with engaging youth, where the leadership team is engaging the youth. And the idea is that we bring the youth involved so that they could also be part of the process. And here's the mentoring process of the team in Hamilton that's now formed. And that team was inspired in part by coming to see one of the shows in Toronto. And then they started, we've been working for 3 years with this group. And actually one of the other things that we've been using with the group is for them to inform us on how the project should evolve. So this is actually a participatory narrative inquiry process where we've captured a series of stories, and that red line there is from the different stages in our workshop day, from arriving at the workshop, doing the opening exercise, to passing energy, to starting to create the initial bit of the story, to starting to evolve the story, starting to mature the story, and anything else. And the stories are placed there, and it gave us some insights into how to. So it's more of an inquiry process than what you might call a traditional research process, because it's looking for surprises that can inform decision making around our work. So, and then briefly, we're just going to describe here that this is our performance model.
Yeah, I just wanted to say as well, like the project began as a community arts project, however, many years ago, and out of the group and out of the leadership team, there are members there who have started to begin to identify themselves as disability artists. And there are still others who are community members who are coming to be part of the community arts project. So the project is sort of on that middle line, like whether it's transitioning or not, but it's kind of an interesting phase, and that also goes a little bit to, I guess, we can talk later about some of the ethics about when working in community and the things to be considering. So before, we're just going to talk a little bit about the community performance, and so this is a participatory performance, and something that I think is quite unique about it is that it's a participatory performance that is designed for people who have complex disabilities to be able to participate, which, in any theater that I've seen, I've never seen that before. So we're sort of in this phase where we're kind of creating a new space and what I call is a new kind of theater. So I'll just talk a little bit about the model. So the idea is we've got the Come to the Edge bar. And so the Come to the Edge bar is, like Steve said, the premise is that our leadership team has arrived in their makeshift helicopter and they've set up this cafe and they've set up this place for people to come and watch them make stories. So the group is running the cafe and the audience comes in and they're served fabric drinks and they're engaging with the performers. And then at the same time, they're also being asked and challenged to think about what are the edge of their unknowns and what is the edge of what they think is possible. And so they're looking at photo cards and they're trying to think. They're also challenged to think what would it take to bring you to that edge. And so we've got photo cards and they're looking at fabric and they're looking at a resource that would help them come to the edge. And then the group we transition into a ritual where the group they create an edge and the group crosses the edge and then the audience sort of follow them over the edge, and so they cross over to the other side, which is the story making part.
Yeah, and part of the rationale there for this first stage is the immersive stage gives us a chance to create the environment, and then the ritual gives a chance to reframe how people are engaging with our community. So that once they cross the edge, they're actually also being challenged to think about something themselves, which is the edge of their unknown. And what does it mean? And we use some ritual practices around thinking about resources that you may need to take you to the edge. What is it that you need to leave behind? What is it you need to have right behind you? What are those types of things that you might need? So, or want to explore, so that people are not, because with our group, the challenge can be that people are not, a lot of people, initially we only worked in communities where there were also other people who use AAC, and it was within, but as we're working with other communities, it's a big challenge or a new experience to engage community members with quite complex disabilities. So we're trying to reframe how that relationship is. So our members welcome people into the space, accept their identification card for being there. We have the ritual, so there's a sense that everyone is slightly vulnerable as they cross the edge and they start to see the story unfold. And then once it goes to the other side, we use a similar process to we use in the workshop, which we call envision sonography. And the story starts to emerge, normally out of some energy that we throw into the ground, and then we paint the room with fabrics, and it starts to emerge from that. But the key thing here is that this process is also kept at a very different speed, so that the audience is also being challenged to follow what's going in a way which they don't know exactly what's going on. So that, but the relationship isn't that our participants and our fellow artists and ourselves are somehow on stage representing a spectacle, but somehow everyone is together in some way.
And then the other thing with the ritual is about taking the audience and really bringing them down into the cryptime so that we take them on a journey. And some of the feedback that we got from the audience, these photos are from a performance we did in April 2017, and we'll be doing this performance again in March in Toronto, and we're adding some more. We're working more on the ritual aspect and the interactions that happen in the immersive world. But some of the feedback that we got was how it was a very hypnotic performance. Sort of the audience felt quite into the zone, and so that's the idea, that the ritual brings the audience down into the zone so that they can be sitting there and in the cryptime, because especially with nonverbal communication, it takes a lot slower than verbal communication. So we kind of slow things down so that the audience is comfortable sitting in that, and then once the story starts to pick up, then the tempo picks up. But that's part of the process. Great, thank you.
Thanks everyone for a beautiful panel. So many connections between you. So I'm gonna get Andrea to run the mic. Please use the mic, even if you think you have a really loud voice, you need to access it and say your name. We have about 20 minutes, so that's a good amount. This is a question based on counting your talk, but anyone can answer it if you want, but I'll answer it. I'd be curious to know what anyone thinks about that, but particularly what aspect of music do you guys bring to athletics?
Wow, thank you. I feel like I just got prepared for my defense. And keep me on track slightly. So I just want to first contextualize access intimacy a little bit. I'm taking the concept from Mia Mingus, who's this very, very incredible disabled Korean adoptee writer and speaker in the States. And she says that this is not the end of access intimacy, that we can only ever have partial definitions. But access intimacy is about access for connection, for community, for disability liberation. It's about the good feeling you have when somebody gets your access need, or that feeling of connection and support and solidarity when you're standing against the inaccessibility of the world together with someone. So I suspect anyways, and maybe this is a whole other book and dissertation, part of what draws us to watch disability performance and aesthetics is watching and feeling access intimacy. The dancer researchers in my project did actually perform, and one of the things they talked about constantly was the importance of the connection with the audience, and the chance to be in communication and be in a very embodied sense of connection with the audience. And so I hope maybe what we're some of the things we sometimes feel, because I think access intimacy is also slippery and making emotions and feelings a determined outcome of what you want to do with your art is always a bad idea. Is that sometimes what we see on stage is access intimacy, and that grabs us and that pulls us. Seeing that connection between dancers, and sometimes as audience members we get to feel that a little bit, maybe.
I was really intrigued by the black hole as well. I thought what was interesting is also that if there's a sense of the artist who goes towards the black hole or whatever, there's that question of what was the meaning, what was the vocation that was happening there. And there was, like you say, a sense maybe that there was an intimacy, possibly an intimacy between two people was also part of the meaning making as well as the room, but the two things are happening together. So there's an interesting, I think that's something that we find really interesting is how do we interpret what, say, the black hole actually means at a moment in time as well. Like, maybe the black hole, you know, if you could get into like all sorts of stuff that's in there. Is the black hole just about to explode, or is it that nothing comes out of it, or is it that it's only about things trying to escape, or is it about things getting sucked in? I thought it's actually an interesting metaphor, and I think actually there's a little bit of a connection with that with some of the approach we use when we create stories, where something starts to be in the room that the question then becomes negotiated. How do you negotiate what this is now becoming? So I thought that was really, and I like the idea of maybe almost something I think that we could link into our work as well.
I'll ask a very prosaic question. And thanks for great presentations. I'm curious, Kelsey and Emery, you both, well, Kelsey, you're working out of Edmonton, and you're referencing Access Dance in Oakland, California. I'm from Vancouver. I work with a theater company, and we have all body dance working there. So I'm just wondering whether, because I very often there is the reference to Access Dance, and they are very much on the leading the front edge, and undeservedly so. I'm just wondering whether there is contact and dialogue between the other Canadian companies that are engaged in this kind of activity, and whether there's potentially any opportunity that could come out of that.
I personally found Access through their internship program. I'm not aware, I didn't find it at the time when I was looking for that, but maybe some other Canadian company had that same kind of program or not. I'm not still aware of that, but I think that it was a great way to find access and to work with them. It was that they have this very successful internship program for any kind of students, and we actually discussed, because I was in Toronto at the time I was doing my master, so we discussed through Skype, and I was quite worried at first because I was coming with mental health issues, and sometimes maybe they didn't necessarily people don't want necessarily to be connected, because I was one of the discussion with the dancers as well. Like often they were talking to me about people. The dancer I quote was, "I'm in a wheelchair," and often people would try to talk to me very slowly and very loudly, and she was like, "No, I'm just in a wheelchair." And sometimes it can be this fear around connected both physical and mental, or mental health issue and physical disability, because they don't want to be necessarily associated together. But they were very open-minded actually to bring me in with my maybe weird ideas sometimes. And it was through their internship program actually that, so maybe it could be a great idea for maybe many other companies, maybe Canadians, want to have this kind of a program for welcoming maybe more researchers or collaborations.
Thanks for the purposing question. So yeah, I mean, I love Access's work. It's beautiful. I actually think Canadian Integrated Dance is doing something like very, very different. And because I'm involved with it selfishly, I like to think it's a little bit better. But I did say that maybe if I ever come into contact with Access folks. I see in Canada, Access, I also would cite like Kenduko, Light Motion when I was around, Dancing Wheels, are very much focused on, the emphasis is generally being around dancers who tend to use manual wheelchairs or who have limb difference. They're almost always, with a few notable exceptions, thin, white, and young, and fit into that very dancerly mode of body aside from that one axis of difference. And I'm really interested in the ways that Canadian integrated dance, like All Bodies, Curtsy, Propeller, we have the biggest and Momo, we have the sort of biggest connections to. I lack connections in Montreal. So if anybody wants to come chat with me and talk about your work here, I would love to hear about it. But all of these companies are deeply invested in a broad swath, broad understanding of disability and impairment, and are invested in thinking through how access can be a point of opening for not just dancers who identify as disabled, but who also identify as trans and queer or fat, and trying to sort of explode the notions of what bodies and what minds and what ways of being are possible on stage. So yeah, there are connections, and access is beautiful, but I actually don't see a ton of relevance to the kind of work and the kind of spaces I'm interested in making in Access's work.
It's very interesting actually that you bring that, because that's something I brought in my research, that in Access, like I saw like different cultures and their dancers, but the type of bodies that you see on stage, and I think even it was a very small clip that I showed you, you can see it's very thin, very muscular, very athletic, and that's the subject I brought with them, is that even if you talk about integrated dance, still very, not classic, but almost, I'm going to say classic, modern and contemporary type of body. It's very based on a dance aesthetic and dance kind of perfect body in certain ways too. And a lot of dancers actually talk to me about that as well. Is like she one of the she associated herself as a non-disabled person, and she said like a lot of people look at me, I'm small, and they were like, you're a dancer? And she says like, yeah. And so often, yeah, you still see that a lot though with Access for sure. I work with them and I agree with that.
Hi, thanks for your presentation. I don't know if it's the most relevant question, but I'll ask it anyways out of curiosity. I'm just wondering if on either of your projects, if you ever consulted or collaborated with like occupational therapists or anyone in the rehab science field. I'm asking just from like my own curiosity because I'm training to be an OT and I'm also an artist. And I think it's really exciting to see this because I see this at the intersection of my passions.
Yeah, well, we have actually worked a lot with speech and language pathologists and OTs. So when we began the project, we were connected with one of the technology access clinics in Toronto, And actually, one of the speech and language pathologists came to one of our workshops. And then in the work that we're doing in Hamilton, we are connected with the Ron Joyce Children's Center. And that's there they have a technology access clinic where the speech and language pathologists and the OTs work in terms of, for communication. And although it's in the children's hospital, it serves adults and children. So we're working quite closely with them for the project, mainly to connect with their clients, but also we just actually recently did a presentation in terms of talking about some of the processes that we're using, and they're interested because a lot of the work that we're doing, the processes that we use, we see a lot of applicability for not just in the arts context, but also in where people are either just like PSWs, like working in a residence, or speech and language pathologists. And so we're looking at and working with them in terms of talking about and sharing some of the work.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that we found interesting is talking about it. Generally, if I talk about it 3 times, they understand less by the 3rd time. So we did the session, we actually got one of the speech language pathologists who took them through the process as them being the person in the activity, because people expect it to be something they're going to watch. I think it's like talking about coming to the rehearsal. There's that sense of being able to be part of it, so they can see the type of meaning making, the choices, and that sort of embodied feeling. So that was quite interesting because the paradigm shift is really hard to break. Like when we were in Belgium, we did the workshop with the community there, and I was speaking to one of the staff, and I said, "So can you just ask the people what they thought about it?" So the next day, she goes, "Well, I spoke to the staff and they said it's really, really weird, like just very, very strange, but it seems to work." Right? So it's just like it's not like they take what they're doing and then you add something to it. It's not like that. It's like you're using a different training. So that's quite interesting. But so in some ways you don't want to. If you try and ask them to understand within the frame they're working, it's really unfair in some ways. So but they want to. They do see, because the big challenge that the OTs are facing is it's very hard not to put words in someone's mouth. Someone who can't speak particularly, who can't, is really hard not to be directive and accidentally directive. So some of these methodologies can be ways to allow them to create meaning on their own terms. So yeah, so this is a good question. Thanks. We could talk afterwards.
Thanks. Thanks for your presentations. I have a question for each of the presenters. For Kelsey, I was, I found that description of the studio process very compelling, and I was just wondering if, or I'd invite you to share if there were any additional examples that you noticed where there was a challenge to what I understand the frame that you presented. For example, Robert, instead of releasing someone, follow them, and I can understand I wonder if there was a desire for some kind of intimacy at that point. And I'm just wondering if there were other examples that you experienced. And then for Anne-Marie, I found it really intriguing that Access does kind of resist identification as a disabled or non-disabled dance company. And at the same time, in addition to the normative ableist kind of body that was described of the dancers, I'm wondering too if you might elaborate on what I heard, their hesitancy and reluctance to speak about mental health within the dance world, because I always find that very intriguing myself. The mind body within the dance world is seen to be integrated, very much intertwined, except, and there's significant exceptions that are, I think, driven by um, ableist norms. And then for us, Stephen and Jenny, I'm just curious. I really was taken by the performance, the integration, and also the leadership that you described of the performer, actors, movers. And I'm wondering if there is, I hear you that they facilitate, and I'm also wondering if if there is a desire on their part for more in terms of how would you say it, the different roles within a production.
Two to 3 minutes. Yeah, we're out of time.
Okay.
But please answer.
Okay, so quickly guess. Many with Robert, and also thanks for this. The bit I cut out of the presentation was we encountered similar challenges to working memory for other artists when we were exploring set technical movement phrase. And in those cases, it was very much about people's training and type of training as a barrier. Robert is an expert visual cuer, so he was happy and fine doing unison movement. But other folks, really struggled with working memory at those moments. To go back to your question about the body and the mind, that's very something actually that brought me to that studies, to that research. Because with anxiety, I go through my body and every day of my life. So that was very interesting as a dancer as well to touch that with them and to see what they can do, what can be inspiring for me to model and create this 3-layer model. And that was very interesting actually during one of the focus group with the dancers. I don't remember exactly how I formulated that subject. But I remember being extremely surprised with the answers of their mental health, and he said like, no, we don't. One of the dancers just said like, no, I don't have any. I'm like, you don't have any issues with it, maybe, but we all have with mental health, and just this fact of talking about our mental health, as we can talk about our physical health, was very. I really felt the. No, we don't necessarily want to go there. And that just reminds me what I touched a little bit during the presentation of this stigmas and this misconception about mental health issues that you should control your mind so people can have weird responses or connections with mental health issues. So I felt that kind of stigmas in that kind of discussion with them as well, which was for me very interesting to research and to go through actually why we could have this kind of misconception. And I think that the way I build a model as well can be very interesting for that kind of company with physical disability awareness to go through this invisible disability awareness, because everybody can have misconceptions or just don't know about a certain subject. So it was very interesting, actually.
Yes. But it's the complexity becomes huge in some ways. So we also have a model. So we bring in some of our work from the more developmental sort of community international development sort of thing. But we have a model for this particular imagining possibilities in the sense that there's a sense of the individual and how is their relationship? And in many ways, they have a relationship with the personal support worker and their client. Then there's the relationship in a workshop, and then there's a relationship to our team in the workshop. So then there becomes, what's the relationship for the group that's been with us for 7 years on the journey? And sadly, some of the team haven't, some are not with us anymore because of the health challenges that this is a reality in the project. And so we actually see that group as that sort of leadership team. They advise us on the ethics of what we do and how we engage. So there's a role there, and in some ways, and as we bring the next leadership team on board, we're seeing that they're also very keen. They're not necessarily, like, actually for us, the challenge is almost concerned about pushing too far the other way. Like, we could have pushed 2 or 3 years ago to say, okay, you're going to be professional disability artists and frame it. And I don't know if they were ready for that. But it would have opened up different funding options for us. But so there was a sense of actually holding it in the community and saying, well, this is about community. You're valuable in advising on that community and how it happens. And in some ways, we push for another type of role when we do the performance. So then the question is, okay, Laura's behind the bar doing the Spradbury bar, and we're actually going to extend that to have a resource for the people crossing the edge. So the different members of the group, they want to take different roles in the performance. So there's a push there for taking a role. So you've got this sort of rolling out the program, and you've got this role in doing a performance. So yeah, it gets complex because different people are quite different in where they are in the world.
I know we're out of time, so just quickly, but just a little story. So the other thing about roles is that until someone experiences something that before was maybe thought was impossible, then all of a sudden they start to see what can be possible and start to think about what other roles can they take or can happen. So, like for example, in when we were rehearsing this, like one of our performers wanted to just be in the bar. Like she just wanted to be a person drinking in the bar. And like, don't you want to be like a bartender? No. Okay, but then after the show, like she wanted to do every role, and like now when we talk about the next show, she's like, I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to do that. So yeah, it's just so great.
Thank you all very much. That was excellent.